Good morning. Thank you guys so much for tuning into today's live stream. It is July 21st, 2025. And to begin today's live stream, I do want to take a look at the economic calendar here for today. And it looks like we don't really have much coming into today, to be honest. The only thing we have is CB leading index month over month. Throughout the week, nothing too, volatile for news at least. Besides maybe unemployment claims, flash manufacturing PMI, and flash services PMI. And that's going to be on Thursday, but nothing too exciting. And so here we can go actually just dive right into the economic calendar, or not the economic calendar, but the technicals here for today. Alright, so coming into today, I do want to mention that today is a Monday and that we had a monthly closure, or not a monthly closure, sorry, a weekly closure just recently, right? And so let's take a look at how we closed here previous week. So this is the weekly candle of last week, and with the way that we closed here on this weekly candle, you can make the assumption that the next weekly candle we should open, maybe manipulate lower and expand higher towards the weekly high, the previous weekly high, right? And so that's going to be my objective. For me, within this week, within the week of July 21st to July 25th, I am anticipating one of these days to take out the weekly high. So I have a bullish weekly bias as of right now, right? And let's take a look on daily. Let's take a look here on the daily candle. And this is how we closed here on Friday. So that down close candle right there. With the way that we closed on that specific candle on Friday, it created a daily fair value gap. And the way that we created this daily fair value gap gives me the idea that we could rebalance into it coming into today. However, we didn't, none of these intraday time frames here, none of these like 4-hour candles, 6-hour candles, 8-hour candles, or 10-hour candles suggested the idea that we should rebalance into the daily fair value gap. Even though this fair value gap formation gives us the possibility of rebalancing it into it, the fact that we didn't create any bearish intraday models suggested that okay, maybe we might just have to treat this as a breakaway gap depending on how we close on the intraday candles. But yeah, so coming into today, I didn't necessarily have a bias. I was under, but I had the bias, or not the bias, but I had the idea that we could rebalance into the daily fair value gap if we get a bearish intraday candle closure, which we never got. And so my best approach coming into this morning specifically is I'm going to utilize the 4-hour candle and the 8-hour candle for a intraday bias, or I guess for a morning bias, right? And so this is that blue line in that, or those two blue lines right there are drawing or towards the 4-hour candle and the 8-hour candle, which will close within 23 minutes or so here. And with the way that we are creating this candle so far, it is making me believe that we should most likely take out the 4-hour high and the 8-hour high. So that's kind of what my bias here is coming into the morning. It's not like concrete yet, right? Because we haven't closed on the 4-hour candle and the 8-hour candle yet. But like I said, with the way that it looks like it's going to close, I can anticipate for the next 4-hour candle and the next 8-hour candle to take out the 4-hour high / 8-hour high. So that's just like a clear, or just a very short-lived objective here. So we did end up taking out previous week's high and previous day high here just now. And so because we have completed the weekly objective here, which I just told you guys about, right? I just mentioned that the weekly objective was the weekly high. Because we have taken out the weekly high already, I'm not going to utilize the weekly time frame anymore, right? So here on now, here until Friday of this week, I'm not going to utilize the weekly candle anymore. I'm not going to use the weekly time frame. Its objective has been completed, and then after a candle completes its objective, there's really no need for me to force anything onto that time frame anymore until we get a closure of that time frame. Same thing here on the daily time frame. My bias, my objective wasn't the daily high, right? I made an assumption that we could rebalance into the daily fair value gap due to the way that we created the daily fair value gap. But prices on the intraday time frames never told me that we were going to rebalance into the fair value gap. So I'm not going to force that objective. And so, the fact that we did take out previous day high means that I can't utilize this daily time frame anymore. I can't utilize the daily time frame anymore. So I have to either wait for a new daily candle to close or just use the intraday time frames, such as the 4-hour and the 8-hour, those time frames which I was referencing earlier. And so, yeah, that's pretty much it for my bias coming into the morning session today, right? And yeah. So I did want to mention that here we have an SMT divergence with yes. So from this swing low to this swing high, you can notice here on NQ that we actually took out the swing low. So on NQ we went past that low, and on NQ and on ES we did not go past that low. So that blue line is the same blue line on NQ. Look at where NQ did. NQ, we actually went past that blue line, whereas ES, we did not go past that blue line. And so that indicates that there's been manipulation in the markets, and that now the fact that we did end up reversing, it's possible because of the presence of SMT. And then you may notice here as well where NQ, we have taken out previous week's high and previous day high, whereas ES, we did not take out, previous week's high, previous day high. And so there is an SMT divergence here right now between NQ and ES at the highs. So if we end up reversing, that's very possible because of the fact that we do have SMT divergence here between NQ and ES. So we'll see here. The idea I have in mind right now is, or the question I have in mind is, does ES have the strength to catch up to NQ? Will we take out previous week's high on ES as we did here on NQ? We have about like 16-17 minutes left until we close on the 4-hour candle and 8-hour candle. I'm not going to force anything here for the time being. I think my best approach is just to wait until those two candles close, and then that's where I could, potentially take anything, right? But for the time being, like I said, I'm just gonna sit on the sidelines and just be patient. Alright, so I actually want to go over the pros and cons here with you guys. Alright, so the pros and cons from the week of July 14th to July 18th. So the first pro that I want to mention is that I should continue to take consistent setups, right? Every single setup that I take should have a higher time frame objective. I should have a model, and I should have a entry pattern with every single setup that I take. Higher time frame objective is essentially what's the bigger reason for why I want to see prices continue in a specific direction. Your model is how you are going to align yourself with the bigger time frame directional order flow, right? If the higher time frame is suggesting to me that we should take out the previous week's high, meaning I'm going to be bullish for the next week, my model is going to be like on a time frame that's like the daily time frame, and it should suggest the same idea. If the weekly time frame is suggesting bullish, then the daily time frame should also be suggesting bullish, right? And you can kind of think the model in terms of like a smaller magnet and the higher time frame objective as a bigger magnet. Both those magnets are gonna pull you towards them after we get towards the smaller magnet. The bigger magnet is gonna continue to pull you towards that specific direction. So it's like both pulling you towards a specific direction. It's just the higher time frame objective has a stronger pull for you, right? And the last thing that's always going to be present in my setup is a entry pattern. your entry pattern, or my entry pattern of choice, is always going to be a fair value gap, and that fair value gap should always support the model and the higher time frame objective. If I'm bullish on the higher time frame objective and my model, my entry pattern should also support the idea of bullish prices, right? A good friend of mine he mentioned to me that he stopped using fair value gaps because he didn't understand when fair value gaps should be respected and when it should not be respected. The easiest way that I can, or I guess the simplest way to look at this is your fair value gap in alignment with your model and the higher time frame objective. If the story is telling you that we should be continuing higher, then your fair value gap should be, then any bullish fair value gap should be respected, right? This is not like a guarantee, which is why you're going to have a stop loss, but just keep that in mind that even if there's a fair value gap, it doesn't indicate that it should be always be respected. And the way that you can tell when a fair value gap is going to be respected or not is dependent on your model and the higher time frame objective. Second thing that I do want to mention is you want to make sure that your fair value gap could be rebalanced, meaning the way that we create the fair value gap is going to tell you a lot of information. It's going to tell you if we should treat it as a breakaway gap, or if we could possibly treat it as a gap that gets rebalanced. And if you are currently like actually taking a trade, right, then you want to watch closely at how prices kind of interacts with the consequent encroachment of the fair value gap. Consequent encroachment is essentially the midpoint of a fair value gap. Typically, you want to see if you're bullish, then you don't want to see prices ever going below the consequent encroachment, and specifically, you don't want to see prices close below the consequent encroachment, right? And so that's just something that you should also kind of watch, is pay attention to the fair value gap and pay attention to how it's kind of being treated. Third is to utilize every single time frame to your advantage. Time is fractal, right? The fact that I was able to give you guys a idea of what we should do on the weekly time frame and the daily time frame, and then I was able to give you guys an idea of what the 4-hour time frame and what the 8-hour time frame should do, is it's a good point to make for the idea that time is fractal, right? Every single time frame is going to have a objective. The 4-hour time frame, the 8-hour time frame has its own objective. Within the next 4 hours, you can make the idea that we should take out the 4-hour high. Same thing on the daily time frame, same thing on the weekly time frame. The weekly candle, does it look like we should take out the weekly high, or does it look like we should take out the weekly low? You can apply the same concepts to a multitude of time frames. And the lowest that I would ever go is probably going to be on the 15-minute time frame. Anything below the 15-minute time frame, I'm gonna treat it as a time frame for an entry pattern, right? Yeah. So understand that time is fractal. Utilize the fact that time is fractal. Last but not least, you want to pay close attention to SMT before and during a setup. It's going to prevent you from taking any unnecessary losses, right? And like I mentioned before, it tells you a lot, right? Like here, NQ and ES, we have both now taken out previous week's high and previous day high. And so we don't have any SMTs right now. The fact that NQ and ES doesn't have any SMTs suggests to me that there is a possibility that we should continue to seek higher prices, and that it's appropriate to make that assumption. Here are some improvements here. So improvements are just essentially a summary of some of the pros and cons. So first, take consistent setups. Every single setup should have a higher time frame objective, a model, and a entry pattern. Second, you want to watch closely between the relationship of NQ and ES. Their relationship is going to show you if there's been any manipulations between the two correlated assets, right? Third, just to be proactive. You want to be present for any opportunities, and you have to be able to seize the moment when the opportunity is present. Fourth, pay close attention to the entry pattern. I can give you guys a more deeper dive into what this means, right? As I think it's a little bit easier to explain to you guys what it means, but just pay close attention to your entry pattern, and you want to ask yourself, should my fair value gap be treated as a entry pattern? Should it be treated as a breakaway gap, or with the way that we created the fair value gap, should it be rebalanced, right? And then you also want to consider how prices is interacting with the consequent encroachment of the fair value gap. If we disrespect the consequent encroachment of the fair value gap, then you may want to consider taking some contracts off, or just closing the entire execution, collapsing the execution. And the last thing is, you want to track the 10K journey. You want to track, or for me at least, I'm going to track my 10K journey. I'm going to journal every single trade that I take, and I'm going to do my best to try to record every single execution. And with that, that's going to wrap it up for the pros and cons for me. And yeah, let's get back into the technicals here. We have about 4 minutes left until we close here on the 4-hour time frame and the 8-hour time frame. I do want to mention that let's take a look at this 8-hour high. This 8-hour high here is the same high as the 4-hour high, which is the same high as the hourly high, and the hourly high is the same high as the 30-minute high, and the 30-minute high is the same high as the 15-minute high. The fact that the 15-minute high is the same high as the 8-hour high means that we should complete the 8-hour objective, which is we should take out the 8-hour high within the next 15 minutes. But yeah, so that whole idea, the fact that I can make the assumption that we should take out the 8-hour objective within the next 15 minutes that's really powerful. And it's that whole idea is called scope, and you want to utilize that technique to understand when specific objectives should be completed, right? Sometimes you may look at it like, oh, we should complete this within the next 8 hours, but if you look more closely, then you'll have more, I guess, information of when a specific time frame should be completed. And so we have about a couple seconds left until the closure. And so like I stated before, I am going to be bullish here for the morning session. I want to see us take out the 8-hour high. And not only should we take out the 8-hour high, but we should take out the 8-hour high within the next 15 minutes here. So on the 15-minute time frame, it's easier to see here, but yeah, I do want to see us take out this 15-minute high, which is the same high as the 8-hour high, and I want to see prices treat the 15-minute fair value gap as a breakaway gap. There we go. So that's us completing the 8-hour objective. We just took out that high here, as you can see. We did go past that swing high right there, and yeah, so that's the morning objective. I wasn't able to really frame anything based off of the way that we closed. I had to sit on the sidelines and just kind of had to spectate of what could have happened, and that ended up becoming, that turned out true. And so for me, I think that's going to be all for the technicals here. What I do want to leave you guys with is that you may want to, or not may, but you should pay close attention to how we close on the 6 hour time frame, which is going to close within the next 2 hours. So depending on how the 6 hour candle closes, that's going to give you a new that's going to give you an objective, right? Whether we should take out the 6 hour high or if we should take out the 6 hour low. You want to pay close attention to that. And same approach on every single candle that closes, right? Hourly candle, you want to ask yourself, is, are we going to take out the hourly high, or are we going to take out the hourly low? And yeah, so the last thing I do want to mention here for today is the weekly market outlook. On NQ, I am anticipating for prices to take out the weekly high based on the weekly power of 3, which we did complete that objective. We did take out the weekly high. The fact that the reason why I was able to make that assumption is because we closed on the weekly candle pretty bullishly, and it suggests to me that we should at least take out the weekly high. On the daily time frame, we did create a bullish daily fair value gap, which we could rebalance, but turns out prices is bullish. We had SMT divergence. Due to the fact of SMT, it gave us the possibility of us reversing before even giving us the opportunity to rebalance the daily fair value gap. And so yeah, and so coming into this week now, gonna just utilize the daily models, intraday models here as well, to align for possible setups, right? But that's pretty much gonna be all for me. That's my weekly objective, and yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in to today's live stream, and until next time.